Hello, I'm Rob. Welcome back to PhotoBite. We have something a little bit different to show off today. A new smartphone from CAT, of all places. The S62 Pro. I know what you're thinking. Why are you showing off a builder's phone on a photo and video channel? But this actually has some quite interesting features. But its main one is a built-in thermal imaging camera. Yeah, this is the CAT S62 Pro, CAT's latest super rugged flagship smartphone. At first glance, you might notice it's not as bulky and cumbersome as most rugged smartphones you might think of. It's definitely more modern styled and sleeker than others on the market. Now, it's not tiny, it's still quite thick, but it's got more of that traditional smartphone form factor. Here's it compared to my Samsung A70. It's not that much thicker. It's a little bit heavier than a traditional smartphone, but there's not a lot in it. It's not like you're carrying around a massive brick all day. The screen does feel a little last gen with its massive bezels, but the full HD LCD display is good enough and is bright enough and sharp enough for most needs. It also has crazy glove support, so if you're running around with massively thick gloves, you can still use the phone no problem. It's running Android 10 with an update to Android 11 at some point. It's a surprisingly stock experience, which you don't get with a lot of these kind of phones. There's only a few apps in there that you might consider bloatware, but they're mainly for the thermal imaging capabilities. But we'll talk more about that later. It's rocking a Snapdragon 660, 128GB of storage with SD card expansion up to 256, 6GB of RAM, a big 4000 mAh battery, a nice and snappy fingerprint scanner on the back, ports dual SIM cards, which is always good to see, and this orange button on the side, which is quite interesting. It can be fully customized to launch whatever app you want or to do a few different functions. Or what I think it's designed mostly for is if you got a walkie-talkie style app and you can assign this to be push to talk. So you can communicate with other workers on site just with a push of a button. Quite handy, quite cool. As you can see, this phone is built to take a lot of abuse. They're using a recessed Corning Gorilla Glass 6 screen, which is super duper durable. And if you do happen to do the impossible, you'll most likely be breaking the top layer, which is just a screen protector on top, which adds as an extra sacrificial layer of defense. Its very sealed design allows them to get dust proofing and waterproofing IP68 and IP69 respectively. They even say you can wash it with soap and water, so if it gets really dirty, if you've been out on a massive hike or something, it's really muddy, you can just put it under the sink and wash it with soap. It's also been specifically engineered to allow the use of alcohol or bleach wipes on the device without damaging any of the surfaces or any of the finishes on the device, which you don't see with many other manufacturers. Thought about that extra little step in the manufacturing is a really nice touch, especially in this day and age where hygiene is so necessary, and using bleach wipes or alcohol wipes on devices like this is very, very necessary. They boast a US military spec of H10H, whatever that means, but I'm told it means that they passed military standards for its ruggedness and its usefulness in the field, I guess. That spec includes temperature shocks, going from really low cold temperatures to really high at sudden speed, and it's surviving that fine. They've even tested these phones dropping it from 1.8 meters directly onto steel 30 times on each side of the device with it surviving, which really makes you confident holding this phone knowing you ain't gonna break it that easily. They also include a 2-year warranty, which is better than most, as if the phone breaks or is damaged in any way from any of the stuff that they say it should survive from, they'll replace it completely. Like, so if you drop it in a little puddle and it fries the board on it, they would replace it because really it should be able to survive a full submersion. This really shows how confident they are about the ruggedness of this phone, if they're willing to do that. Now, this phone currently sports the highest quality thermal camera integrated into a smartphone on the market right now. And by the sounds of it, they have an exclusivity deal with FLIR, so it's going to stay that way for a little while at least. It features FLIR's Lepton 3.5 sensor, which apparently is brand new. It has 4 times more thermal pixels, 30% more image sharpness, and a 10% wider field of view, while being 12% smaller than the last version. This now allows for professional grade thermal imaging built right into a smartphone. Crazy. Let's try this camera out. So to use the thermal camera, you open the My FLIR Pro app and you get all these cool features and settings to use. First of all, up here in the top left, this is where you can choose the modes. The first one on the left just shows you the thermal imaging so there is no extra camera detail going into the image here. And so this is purely just the temperatures that it's registering. Second one here, MSX, allows you to blend detail from the real 12 megapixel camera on the back with the thermal imaging, allowing you to pick out a lot more detail. This isn't really something you'd normally be able to do with a thermal imaging camera, so this allows you to get that extra bit of detail that sometimes would be lost if you're just looking at a thermal image. Makes it easier to see what you're looking at. This slider at the bottom, you change this depending on how close your subject is. This sets the offset of the detail image, allowing you to get closer and change exactly where the detail lies. That way you can get it to match up. Third one here does a bit of the opposite. This one here blends the actual camera image with the thermal image, and you can choose between. And then the final one is just the standard camera, but you could still put on thermal markers. But yeah, speaking of thermal markers, this final one, if I switch back to, you can use this section to create a load of different markers to take samples of the image and tell you exactly how hot they are. This one's a point, so this will tell you your degrees. You can switch between Celsius or Fahrenheit. You can choose a box and have it tell you an average. If you hold on the box or a point, you can then add a min-max value and add a note as well. So this will tell you the minimum and maximum in that area. And you can have that for the full screen, you can have a circle, or you can have a line for average along that line. This third one here allows you to tweak the threshold of the colors. So you can drag up and down here and change how sensitive the colors react to the thermals. You can then also lock this with this button up here. So it's unlocked at the moment, so it will change depending on how the heat changes. But as soon as you start dragging on this, it will lock it in place. As I said, that's the lock button, that just locks the sensitivity. And then there's a high temperature mode here, which if you're working with extreme temperatures, this will become much more accurate. If you're working with fire, for example. Finally, this button on the right, you might see it occasionally has been dropping on its own and doing its little animation. That is just resetting the thermal camera, as with all thermal cameras, the temperature will drift slightly the longer you have it on, so it refreshes automatically every now and then just to allow it to be as accurate as possible. Down here, you can choose a bunch of different color palettes. Iron is the traditional one that you might recognize, but you can have things like rainbow, or you can have night vision mode, and you can obviously all tweak these with the threshold as well. Yeah, it can take photo, video, you can stream to YouTube Live, and even take some time lapses as well, so lots of useful features there. Finally, this button here at the bottom right, this switches between vivid IR mode. When it's on, it gives you better contrast and better detail, but if you turn it off, you'll get a little bit more performance out of it. It'll be a bit more snappier and faster. Now finally, one of my favourite parts is you can go in here. This is an image I've already taken, and go, oh, I messed up, I didn't want all this data on here. You can hit the little edit button, and you can go in after the fact and delete and change all the thermal imaging properties about the image. To say I wanted to change the color palette, I could. I can change the threshold of the color. All the thermal data is stored in the image file itself, allowing you to change all of this after the fact. You can even go in here and go more back to the original image and change the macro drift. It's all really cool, so you don't have to worry about getting that perfect shot of the thermal right there and there. You can then do it all after the fact, allowing for much more customization. Really useful when editing these photos. I could see this camera and this phone being even useful for basic recreational uses, or DIY projects, like if you break down but you need to find out what part of your car's overheated, for example, or you're like me and Josh and we like to go RC car racing and parts of the RC cars always malfunction and get really hot. It makes it really useful that way. You can see some of that footage here. Yeah, I think it's really cool and a really fun and new way of taking some photos and seeing the world in a little bit of a different way. One downside is the thermal camera is only paired with a 12 megapixel camera, which isn't very good. It does the job in mixing detail into your thermal images, but as a standalone camera, it's pretty poor. This is felt even more by the front-facing camera, which is only 8 megapixel. Oh, and also, if you're filming thermal video, it only films at 8.5 Hz, which is a bit of a shame. I was told this was to ensure thermal accuracy to reach the military spec, as higher refresh rates might have lost accuracy in the thermal department. It would be nice to see, maybe in a future update, being able to uncap or add a little bit higher refresh rate to the thermal camera, just with a big warning on the screen saying it's not going to be accurate, as like creatives and people that it's not super needed to be that accurate could get a lot more out of it if it could be a little bit faster and a little bit more usable that way. Other than builders and site workers, who could I see using this phone? I could see this being an excellent rugged companion for those really outdoorsy photographers and creatives. Those that are backpacking over mountains and cliffs in super cold temperatures and super hot temperatures could really benefit from a device this rugged. I could also see wildlife photographers getting quite a good use out of the thermal camera, for an example. If you're out in the dark and you're trying to find some animals that are hiding in a bush, you could use the thermal imaging to spot them, or spot from nearby heat signatures to track them down. Or maybe if you're a reviewer that gets a brand new Canon camera and you want to see exactly how hot the temperatures are getting, it could be quite useful there too. Or maybe you want to start an Instagram feed where all your images are all thermal and it could look really cool and colourful. But there are many circumstances where a thermal camera of this quality and accuracy could come in very handy. The ruggedness and the thermal imaging, however, definitely comes at a price, as you'd have to forego some aspects of smartphones you'd be used to at this price range, such as the screen being smaller and tucked under these big bezels, and being only an LCD screen or an AMOLED with those incredible blacks and always on display features are non-existent on this kind of phone, where you'd get that on another phone in a similar price range. And you're getting some abysmal normal cameras on this thing. It'd be very nice if they could pair that thermal camera with some higher end sensors in the next revision. But compared to other rugged phones, this thing is above and beyond in almost every way. It's just still not quite there when it comes to the feature set of a standard smartphone. Overall, I think it's a very interesting phone. It could appeal to more people than you might think. But yeah, I've been Rob, this has been PhotoBite. I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.